Over the weekend, Senator-elect Raphael Warnock, the man who inherited the pulpit at Dr. King's spiritual home, Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, who 1 year ago today was welcoming appointed Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler to the pulpit months before she became his Senate opponent, and denounced the vision of racial, political, and economic liberation and justice that he inherited from Dr. King. That, Reverend Warnock, spoke to the work America still has to do.
There is a sense in which the world is in flux, and when that happens, there are always those demagogues who are trying to scapegoat those other people and stirring up the worst types of stereotypes and creating all kinds of division, age-old racial and religious resentments, divisions that blur our vision.
Joining me now is Bishop William Barber, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, and Michael Eric Dyson, distinguished professor of African American Studies at Vanderbilt University and the author of Long Time Coming, Reckoning with Race in America. And the Reverend Dr. Dyson, I have to make you defer to the bishop. You know, a bishop ranks higher in this instance, so I will defer first. I'm going to go first to the bishop. Bishop Barber, you know, Bernice...
Barber.
we gotta defer. So Bishop Barber, Bernice King had a tweet today that I thought was perfect, because all these Republicans are out here. Let me quote the 1963 March on Washington speech. I have a dream. They all are quoting it today. Bernice King said, "Please don't act like everyone loved my father," she tweeted. "He was assassinated. A 1967 poll reflected that he was one of the most hated men in America. Most hated. Many who quote him now and evoke him to deter justice today would likely hate and may already hate the authentic King." It is a thing that annoys me every King Day, that he is misused. This was a man who wanted justice. He wanted what you wanted. The Poor People's Campaign. That's what he launched. Your thoughts?
You notice they never quote the agenda of the March on Washington: $2 minimum wage, which would be $15 today, and a complete and full Civil Rights Act. We must be honest. We can't deal with innocence. What we saw happen at the Capitol 2 weeks ago is the result of a long history. Many corporate leaders, Republican politicians, and religious nationalist pulpits have sown politics of race-driven, class-based division that was cynically named 50-some years ago positive polarization. They actually said, Richard Nixon and others, we are going to do this deliberately to divide the country in half. And what we know is this strategy of feeding and seeding intentional race-class division into the body politics spilled over into inevitable violence that ideas of white supremacy always produce. And Dr. King told us that every time there's the possibility for white, black, and brown, poor, and low-wealth people to come together, the forces, he said, the aristocracy does this. And make no mistake, Joy, your audience, the same forces of reactionary rage that killed Dr. King erected gallows on the National Mall and ransacked the Capitol on January the 6th. And those are the same forces and same mentalities that have burned our churches and destroyed our bodies. And we have to understand it is hypocrisy to say you love the dream of Dr. King, but you keep the dream for real locked up, and you only produce the nightmare of poverty, the nightmare of militarism, the nightmare of racism, the nightmare of denying health care, and the nightmare of religious nationalism and that false, distorted morality of religious nationalism.
Yeah, indeed. And, you know, and Reverend Dr. Dyson, you've written many books on Dr. King. And, I mean, he was very explicit, as Bishop Barber said, in wanting to have a minimum, a guaranteed income for people, and of just denouncing the Vietnam War, breaking with Lyndon Johnson over it, and demanding that there be true equality. I mean, this was not a guy who was singing the sort of Happy America song at the end of his life. He was angry. Talk a little bit about the King that people don't want to talk about.
Right. Well, absolutely right. And in that speech you played at the beginning, they had trouble with the microphone. So Dr. King said, "Can y'all hear me?" And clearly, 60 years later, they still don't hear him. The inability to hear what Dr. King was saying. He talked about the triplets of racism, of militarism, and of economic inequality. And these are the plagues that continue to tag our nation with vicious particularity. Make no mistake about it, Dr. King was critical of the uncritical embrace of American exceptionalism. The doctrine of American exceptionalism that says that we are somehow better, that we are morally superior, that we will police the nations of the world and make them bow down and subordinate to our own beliefs about American democracy when we couldn't even practice them here at home. The internal dimensions of contradiction that Dr. King underlined, he said as a result of that, I'm not going to simply speak out against the people who are here in my country who are committing violence. He talked about the young men and women who were engaged in, quote, rioting, which he said was the language of the unheard. He said, but the bombs of Vietnam explode back here at home. So he tied together a global perspective and international awareness of violence in this country and indeed the world to what was going on here. And of course, the hatred that we saw unleashed at the Capitol, we know that had black people been righteously protesting against the vicious limits that are imposed upon us arbitrarily by a police state that continues to disrespect our bodies, would have been arrested, if not killed and shot, as you yourself eloquently pointed out. But these white insurrectionists embracing evangelical piety in the name of God of whiteness, the real God. When you say white evangelical, they're more white than evangelical. White evangelicals in the 1800s prayed to God to help give them imagination how to block black people from voting. That's what they did then. That's what they're doing now. The shenanigans and the mistreatment to which black people are subject by their white brothers and sisters who call themselves Christians means that many of us, as Dr. King said, I wonder who your God is. I wonder who you pray to at night that allows you to go out into the area, lynch a black person, and then come back and say benediction. That's what King spoke out against continually and would so today.
And Bishop Barber, then in this case, if the president-elect Joe Biden came to you and said, lay out for me a Kingian agenda, what would you put on that agenda?
Well, we actually have. We met with the domestic policy team, and even before President-elect was President-elect, and we laid out a 14-point agenda, and we started with a basic moral premise. Isaiah 58 tells us the only way you can heal a nation is repairing the breach. Our own Constitution says you have to establish justice if you want to ensure domestic tranquility. And what we said is it has to be real, and it has to be 5 areas you have to focus on, and then we gave specific policies. 1, you have to deal with systemic racism. We can't accept systemic racism, violence in policy, voter suppression, and violence against our bodies. But we also can't accept poverty and low wealth. 140 million poor people in this country, and we can't accept the war economy. So we have to have this health care and all of those things and many more in order to have a true healing of the breach.
Well, hopefully they are listening. Bishop William Barber, Michael Eric Dyson, thank you both very much. Be safe on this MLK Day. And